Auto insurance can all seem the same until it comes time to use it. So don't get stuck paying more for less coverage. Switch to USAA Auto Insurance and you could start saving money in no time. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Audi. The road is calling. Embrace the thrill of the drive with the all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. Featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and advanced Audi tech. It's not just a new EV, it's a new way to experience driving. The all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron is here. The next chapter of Audi starts now.
Welcome to Nature Backed, Anthony.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm excited to catch up today.
Tell us in a few words, what are you actually building yourself?
We are investing in the global energy transition. We're writing about the energy transition, and we think that it's inevitable, but that doesn't mean that we can't think about how it's being done and, thoughtfully consider the impact that it has on our environment and try to minimize those, problematic moments.
With the energy transition, of course, there's a lot about electric vehicles. We will get to these in a minute also. But on a bigger picture level, when you talk about the kind of energy transition, what do you mean? The shift away from coal, fossil fuels, or what's the background?
Yeah, for me, it's a few things. I mean, globally, the base load today is coal. Really, find certain little places that might have something different going on, but globally, it's coal. And, we can see that notwithstanding where you sit on global warming or climate change, like it's bad to burn coal. It's pollution. It's polluting, right? And so I think what we're really talking about is moving away from a certain type of pollution to a greener energy, which I think is probably largely going to be driven by uranium. Ultimately, nuclear, I think, is probably the cleanest form of energy that we have. But it doesn't just mean the generation. It also means everything in between. It means the transmission of that energy. It also means the storage of that energy. It also means how that energy is used to power things that are common in everyday life. By way of example, electric vehicles. But that also extends to boats and airplanes and sort of the computers that we're on right now. And so it's really going from a type of power that we've been using in large amounts since the 19th century and modernizing it as stewards of the earth.
Mm. In Europe, we're talking a lot about wind and sun, solar, and in some countries, they, at some points at least in the history, they are bigger than fossil fuels or nuclear energy. But I totally agree with you on that kind of uranium logic on a kind of base load going forward. But the challenge I see is the huge timeline. I think Finland opened its latest reactor last year, maybe, and it was like 15 years late. And is it some kind of the nuclear energy change of generations which is taking time at this point, or is it just by definition a really long process?
Well, I think when you think about nuclear energy, the answer is the speed at which we move forward with that. It's really based on governments and regulation. The technology exists, and it has existed, since at a minimum the 80s relatively safely. If you look at accidents like Chernobyl and some of the other accidents, that was more operator error and human error than it was the technology not working. Those were mistakes made by the operators. But I think you want to hold China out as an example and look at the pace at which they're shifting their baseload from coal to nuclear as kind of an example of what a country can do when it decides that it's time to make that shift. Like Finland and some of these other countries are kind of rolling it out and they're 15 years away. That's because that's the time that the government wants to take. If permitting and that process domestically in a given jurisdiction was shortened, then it would take less time. And so, the time to roll out this technology is really heavily driven by governments. It's not, at this point, there's always innovation, there's always changing, technology, but it's a proven and safe technology. So it really kind of comes back to the government's ability to roll it out and permit it and allow people to build it and also fund it. By the way, the other part of this is that nuclear reactors are probably going to need, just like coal gets, by the way, subsidies in various forms from governments because it's a utility and it's for like the greater good of that particular society or country.
Absolutely. Is the fusion and fission, or what's the big nuclear debate? I'm not very familiar with that technology.
Yeah, I think that's a debate for 20 or 30 years. I mean, like that's can they do cold fusion and all this sort of stuff? Probably someday they can, but I think that technology would be at the most nascent stage. And so even once they develop it to the point where you can harness that energy and, do it effectively and cheaply, I think if we were lucky, that would be 20 or 30 years away. Just because, once again, when you take something from a scientific concept to something that was done in a laboratory and then scale that up to something that's going to be powering a grid, there's just a tremendous amount of time in between, when that discovery happens and when it can ultimately be commercialized.
Meanwhile, how do we power this world?
Well, I mean, I think uranium right now is how we need to power it. At least, we need to decrease the base load and reliance on coal. I think wind and, some of the other renewables are helpful. Solar in particular has gotten a lot less expensive. I mean, that's one of the great technologies. I think that what's sort of true about wind is that it's very natural resource intensive to build these things. And so there starts to become a debate around like the life cycle of a wind turbine. Is it really greener? I don't actually claim to have an answer to that. So, when I look at the renewable mix, I really like solar. But also you have to be kind of open about solar and say, well, you got a lot of things going on in there that also consume natural resources. And, when you talk about renewables, you also have to talk about batteries. And, there's been a lot of attention over the last decade for lithium ion batteries, which are the batteries that power cars. And the reason why that attention has been there is because we've been talking about electric vehicles, kind of globally. And electric vehicles use lithium ion batteries because they're light and energy intensive. And so they are suitable for vehicles. But when you start getting into green energy, you need to start talking about large sort of utility scale batteries. And then you start talking about things like vanadium redox batteries and even actually lead acid batteries, because lead acid as a technology, it's a pretty darn good battery. It's big and it's heavy, but if you're going to put it underground or in a facility on site, it's there. And so, we're talking about a paradigm shift, really. We've been powering ourselves for 200 years or whatever, 150 years from coal, and we've got that infrastructure built. And now it's kind of transitioning towards a new way of thinking about powering our lives.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Walmart. New beauty is in bloom at Walmart, and it's all about springtime radiance. From Drybar, Tula Skincare, and hundreds more available online, Walmart has the premium brands you want and this season's on-trend products for flawless, glossy hair and hydrated skin. Big name beauty brands? Check. The things you love? Check. Find trending spring beauty and all you need to look and feel gorgeous at Walmart, on app and online.
Absolutely. One word I didn't hear in your talk was hydrogen. What's your take on hydrogen?
Yeah, I don't think it's working. I mean, I think it's expensive. These projects are multi-billion-dollar projects. Like it's, hypothetically, it's interesting. I think over time, let's talk about like commuting and trucks hauling goods. We have fixed routes. Maybe that works so that you're leaving San Francisco at X number of miles. At these intervals, you can have stations And then when you meet this station, you go to the next station, so I think that there are, interesting potential opportunities there. I don't really foresee that we're all going to drive hydrogen cars. I don't think that's inevitable at all. Instead, I think that for hauling goods long distances, hydrogen makes sense. But just overall, that technology is proven to be, I think, more expensive than was anticipated when that hype started a couple years ago.
Mm. We talked a little bit about solar, but one thing often talked or related to solar is the amount of minerals used in production of those billions of solar panels we need to power this planet. What's your kind of how closely those two industries are kind of tied? Critical minerals and sustainable energy.
Well, look, this is the most important point. Is if you're watching this or listening to it, you're in your car, you're running. If you're inside, look around the room that you're in, and effectively everything that you can see was either mined or grown at its most basic starting point. And I think everyone just needs to understand, if you want to have a modern life, electricity, air conditioning, you absolutely have to have these metals, these minerals, let's say. And, they require a big hole in the ground or under the ground. They require processing, and they're dirty. Like, they just are. And, there are things that we can do to minimize the impact. But I think we have to have a common starting point of just understanding that you are going to have a call on your iPhone later. Guess what? Like that is going to have an impact on the earth. And so the conversation then needs to probably move towards, well, okay, what does that mean? And what are we willing to pay for? And where are we willing to pollute? And they're really complicated conversations. And I'll give you an example. Cobalt, which was very hot, 7 or 8 years ago. Cobalt, by and large, comes out of the Congo. And, there are a lot of questionable mining practices for a lot of artisanal miners there, not everyone. And, I kind of thought early on that you might have a dual pricing mechanism where you had, let's call kind of like the Kimberley process for diamonds, which is, that emerged as a way of not having blood diamonds. So I sort of thought that there was a time when cobalt might have the same thing, which is to say that this cobalt was green, or it was, not mined by children, or, sort of, ethical cobalt, let's say.
Mm.
And you'd have to pay for that because that would cost more. And the fact of the matter is, no one has been or is willing to pay more for ethical nickel or ethical cobalt. And that might change, it might not change. And so we're kind of at this moment where people, on the one hand, will sit around and criticize and take all these sort of views about environment and all these things. But at the end of the day, they're not willing to pay for those views with their wallet. And so that's a very complex thing, and so we need these minerals to have this modern life. They cause pollution, just factually. There are technologies that would reduce that and can reduce that, and in fact do reduce that. But all of this adds to the cost of the ultimate mineral that's going to go into your phone or your car or whatever. And people aren't really willing to pay for that. And if we want it to be cleaner, if we want it to be greener, which I think we probably all do, then we have to accept that we're going to have to pay more for these goods. And that's something people aren't really or haven't been willing to do.
Especially in a downturn.
Yeah, exactly.
I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does without me lifting a finger, so I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
This episode is brought to you by Coffee Mate. After watching this season of the HBO's original series, The White Lotus, this is the tropical getaway I needed. One more pina colada, please.
Hey, you're not on mute.
Oh, I thought I was in paradise. Turns out, it was my Coffee Mate. Coffee Mate Pina Colada and Thai-iced coffee-flavored creamers. Inspired by the newest season of HBO's original series, The White Lotus. For the love of coffee. Try now.
I wonder what's the kind of what's the time it will take to actually make it happen, the green cobalt, because It's probably the reason is that it doesn't really reach the consumer as cobalt. So it's somewhere early in the process of manufacturing goods. And I don't know, maybe Apple's ESG report might, if they still do them after the presidential change, should have the line on the cobalt's greenness.
But they whitewash it, and I mean, the same is true with nickel, by the way. Nickel primarily is produced in Indonesia, where they're just destroying these forests and creating huge natural disasters. Just absolutely kind of tragic, some of the mining practices there. And it's not a secret. I mean, you could Google search it and see the pictures. I mean, it would take almost no effort. And I think the companies, they have these ESG reports. Maybe the employees aren't totally aware of the sourcing, or maybe they intentionally don't look. I'm not sure. But either way, they're not prepared as of yet to kind of buy the minerals and let's call it ethically sourced, because if you talk about chocolate, you talk about ethically sourced cocoa beans, right? So they're not prepared to do that and then pass that on to the consumer, because maybe ultimately the consumer is not prepared to pay for it. So as much as it's disturbing to you or to anyone else to see these pictures of, children mining cobalt in the Congo, which is, it's a certain stereotype that's not true of all cobalt mining. Or, to show pictures of this rainforest in Indonesia being this hydro-sluiced and destroyed. Once again, that doesn't represent every nickel mine, but it certainly all represents a portion of the global production. And, as vivid as those images are, they don't actually cause people to want to pay more for their iPhone. And it's a conundrum, and I don't know quite what the answer is, because the technology is there, increasingly. The ability to mine nickel, in different jurisdictions also exists, but it either has to be something the consumer wants or something that's mandated ultimately.
Absolutely. And I think the consumer kind of gets lost in a longer production cycle, so to say, or the production chain, where, if I would be buying my iPhone, which is made of cobalt, then I would be probably, checking the sourcing of cobalt. If it's one of the components.
It just kind of it reflects modern life. I mean, your kid shows up to dinner tonight at the restaurant and they serve a hamburger and they don't see a cow, they see a hamburger, right?
Exactly.
And at least in the States, I think if you tried to take a classroom of even older kids, high school kids, to a slaughterhouse, I think you would have most parents, you wouldn't be able to do that. But at the same time, most of those kids wouldn't be vegans or vegetarians, so they're eating that meat. 100 years ago, by the way, on the farm, they all would have been a party to those sort of things, right? So we're completely disconnected and disintermediated from all supply chains, right? We just see these end products, and I actually think it's a real problem for being able to. Reverse is the wrong word, but to slow the impact of climate change and some of these problems we're facing is because people just don't have a picture of the whole thing.
Absolutely. But in this kind of, I would say, crooked world, or kind of, not the right world, as an investor, how do you serve this world?
So, I mean, as an investor, I think for me, like one of the ways to think about it is, I do think, for instance, people are going to buy more solar panels, just to pick a simple point, right? So, silver, silver is a highly critical mineral to solar panels. So if you share that view, you look at the supply and demand dynamic of silver and you think that the incremental demand from solar is going to impact the price of silver, then you can buy silver mining companies and silver ETFs. That would be one example. But I think you can kind of carry that logic through a whole host of minerals that are components of things like electric vehicles, solar, maybe vanadium redox batteries, and then express a view through buying either companies or ETFs that participate in that upside because it costs more to mine because there's more demand. So I think that's kind of how we think about it.
Because at a certain level, that becomes the balance of what's good for nature and what's good for the wallet might be somewhat different, right?
Yeah, I think what the best thing for nature would be like less consumption, right? And so, which that would be the thing that would help most. But in terms of like what I think is important is to really help the end consumers and the end users understand the impact of their consumption. So, understand like when you're buying the iPhone or whatever, the impact of that purchase is whatever the impact is. It would be different for each item. And, and maybe that changes consumer behavior. And maybe it sparks people, in the example we were talking about earlier, to pay more, buy less, pay more for products that have ethically sourced minerals, from mines which are being operated with higher environmental standards, using modern technology. There's a lot of new technologies that are coming into the mining space around sorting and different applications to make it cleaner. So, it is something that as a consumer you can actually, you can participate in that by being genuine. It's easy to say I care about the environment, but then to do nothing about it, it's not really that genuine. So I think as a consumer, there's a lot you can do in how you pick the things that you buy and consume.
Absolutely. And interestingly, the consumers around the world today are voting with their feet in a way, or I don't know, rocks or their whatever against the leading electric vehicle manufacturer. It's an interesting dilemma how the politics effect has having had a massive impact on actually electric vehicle sales, which could be actually a good thing for nature, while the human rights and all this kind of logic is kind of distorted around this dilemma.
Yeah, it really is interesting. Like electric vehicles has been the one for about 7 or 8 years now that's really been an impact, since it's the case that vehicles generally cause a huge amount of pollution, so it's an important one. But there are other things too, like look at the impact on methane that cattle have globally, like consumption of certain types of cattle. So it's true.
And of course, note to all the listeners, methane and cows is not linked to the backside of the cows. It's more linked to the front side of the cows.
Yeah, they have that stomach, that dual chamber stomach.
Good. Thanks, Anthony, for this discussion, and good luck.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate having me on.
If you like the show, subscribe and leave a good rating on the podcast platform of your choice. It would mean a world to us.
Everyone has heard about the U.S. space program, but what is actually going on at NASA? Get the real story in 4 minutes or less with the NASA Daily Podcast from Electricast. Join astronauts and researchers as they conduct groundbreaking experiments, work on the International Space Station, and reach for the stars. NASA Daily, your cosmic update.
Electricast. Hey guys, it's Miriam Love here, and I want to share something very special with you. Check out my new release, All In, the Spanish remixes, out now on Electricast Records. And always remember, be love, share love, all love.